We need someone with innovative thinking for this division, someone who gets modern workflows. I'd been standing in that type of meeting for 3 decades. Not in that exact room. We'd switched offices twice since I started, but in the same role, field operations manager. The guy responsible for making sure drift line construction actually delivered buildings that stayed upright. I'm Howard Ames. Age, 61. Time at Driftline, 30 years. The last 20? Overseeing every major commercial build in Columbus, Ohio. I kept my head down, stayed compliant, and made sure my crews were protected. Never blew a deadline that wasn't wrecked by storms or broken supply chains. Then came Jordan Blake, our freshly minted Chief Operating Officer, imported from some California tech startup. He looked at me like I was a rotary phone in a smartphone factory. 6 weeks into the job, and he was already leading meetings about the future of the company. The board wants a full restructuring plan next quarter, he said, eyes fixed on his tablet. We've got to reduce overhead and overhaul the legacy systems. Legacy systems. That's what he called the practices that kept our builds compliant, our schedules honest, and our inspections clean. I nodded. Understood. No argument. No defense. Just a simple reply. He paused, like he'd been bracing for a fight, maybe even hoping for one. But he didn't get it, because I already knew what was coming. The meeting ended with no formal decisions, just the silent clarity that I was being pushed out. 3 decades of experience, now classified as surplus. Back in my office, a tight little room plastered in site maps and paperwork, I opened the lowest drawer. Inside was a thick blue folder. I'd been adding to it for 8 years. Not for a day like this, exactly, more like insurance. Every rushed inspection, every permit shortcut, every corner cut by someone higher up. Documented, dated, noted in my own block letter handwriting. Not because I did those things. I opposed them, loudly at first, then more quietly. Because the people in the boardroom kept making calls that didn't work in the field. So I kept records. If we started building before approvals came in, I wrote it down. If we swapped out materials without documentation, I logged it. I closed the drawer. Didn't pull the folder. Not yet. But then I looked out my window and saw Jordan shaking hands with a guy in a designer suit. They laughed, glanced toward my office. That's when I knew. I joined Driftline back when old Frank Dre ran the show. He'd grown it from a small residential outfit into one of the most respected commercial developers in central Ohio. Frank taught me that buildings were about more than budgets. They were about people. Shortcuts always surface, Howard, he used to say. Could be next week. Could be 10 years. But gravity and water always get the last word. I lived by that. I became the guy who memorized every code, caught issues before foundations were poured, and stuck to blueprints like gospel. But when Frank retired and his son Thomas took the reins in 2010, the culture shifted. Thomas was sharp, but impatient. He wanted expansion, faster projects, national reach, reasonable goals, risky methods. We have to be more aggressive, he'd tell us in leadership meetings. Everyone cuts a few corners. We're playing it too safe and leaving profits behind. The first time we broke ground without final permit clearance, I lost it. Thomas took me aside. "Howard, you're an asset, but the industry's changing. We start early to stay ahead. The permits always come through." He wasn't wrong. They did come through because of my relationships. Inspectors, zoning officers, people who trusted me to keep my word because I always had. That's when I started the blue folder. Not to get even, to protect myself. If something collapsed, figuratively or literally, I'd have the facts. Over time, I stopped pushing back so hard. I still raised issues, but I let the paper trail do the heavy lifting. Soon, I was the old school guy, trusted, but seen as outdated, while younger project managers got fast-tracked for completing jobs faster, not better. Thomas kept elevating risk takers. Then, 5 months ago, I met Jordan, 35 years old, MBA, zero field experience. Thomas introduced him as the future of operations. I shook his hand and knew the cracks that had been forming in Driftline's culture had finally reached me. "Howard, we're reorganizing the field ops department." Jordan sat across from me, with Vanessa from HR nearby. It had been 3 months since our first meeting. Since then, consultants, board meetings, and new hires, young, all business grads, none from construction. "We're shifting to a decentralized supervision model," he continued. "We're dissolving the central field operations role. Instead, project-specific leads will report directly to development." I nodded again, face neutral. It wasn't a discussion. It was a done deal. After 30 years, the board wants to honor your contributions with a smooth transition. We're offering 6 months severance, continued health benefits, and possible consulting engagements if needed. Translation: we're letting you go, and we'll call only if we're desperate. "When does this take effect?" I asked. Jordan glanced at his watch. "Immediately. Today's your final day in office. Vanessa will assist with the exit process. 30 years. Summed up in 15 minutes. I didn't fight. Didn't list the times I'd bailed out doomed projects. Didn't remind them of the favors I'd called in, the permits I'd pushed through, or the mistakes I'd corrected quietly. That stuff doesn't matter when the people in charge don't know what matters. I signed the papers, shook hands, walked to my office. As I packed, my coffee mug, a framed photo of Catherine, my late wife, I saw Thomas watching from the hallway. He gave a small nod. Not regret, just acknowledgement. I left most of the files. They belonged to the company, except for the blue folder. That was mine, and I slipped it into my bag. By noon, I was in my truck, keys in hand, engine off. Through the windshield, I saw the Columbus skyline. 6 buildings I'd helped bring to life. I'd given everything to Driftline. Missed recitals, stayed late while Catherine was sick. Lost myself in the job after she passed. And now, I was disposable, escorted out like obsolete hardware. I started the truck, but I didn't head home. I drove to the Department of Building Safety. Gloria Daniels had been a junior inspector when we met 25 years ago. Now, she ran the place. "Howard," she said, surprised, "what brings you in? Something wrong at a site?" "Not anymore," I said. I was let go. Her eyes widened. "Driftline fired you?" That's crazy. I gave a tired shrug. They're restructuring. Well, she said, their loss. She said, want to grab a coffee and catch up? I set the blue folder on her desk. Actually, I think you should read this first. 2 weeks went by. Nothing from Driftline. Nothing from Gloria. I spent the time organizing my home office and fielding surprised calls from former colleagues. Most had just heard about my departure. The severance checks started arriving, reasonable, though less than promised once prorated over 6 months. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang. Jordan Blake Howard. Hope you're well, came the too casual voice. We're running into a few snags on the Riverside Plaza project. I was wondering if you might consult for a day or two. Riverside Plaza, Driftline's crown jewel. Mixed use. Retail, offices, luxury apartments. Ground had broken 3 months earlier. What kind of snags? I asked. Permit stuff. The city inspectors making noise about changes to the plans we didn't formally resubmit. Nothing big, but it's slowing everything down. Gloria, it had to be. I'd be happy to help, I said. My rate is $300 an hour. 2-day minimum, paid up front. There was a pause. That's steep, Howard. We were thinking more in line with your old salary equivalent. That was an employee rate, I said. I'm a consultant now. And consultants with my insight don't come cheap. More silence. I'll speak to Thomas and get back to you. They did, same day. Thomas called himself, agreed to my rate, but made it clear it was a one-off deal. I signed their rushed contract and agreed to meet the project manager at the site the next morning. One look, and I knew the problem. They'd extended the foundation beyond the approved boundary, encroaching almost 6 feet into the setback zone. More space for retail, no doubt. A typical Driftline move. Beg forgiveness, not permission. Jordan waited near the trailer with Alan Pierce, the project manager. Thanks for coming, Jordan said, all grins. We've got a little situation with Inspector Daniels. She's saying we violated setback rules, threatening a stop work order. Did you violate the setbacks? I asked. Alan hesitated. Approved plans show 40 feet. We adjusted to 34 to meet retail demands. You submitted revised plans? They're in process. Jordan jumped in. But we had to keep the schedule moving. You know how it is. We were hoping you could talk to Gloria. She's always respected you. You want me to convince her to ignore this while you fix the paperwork? Basically, yes, he admitted. It's red tape. Minor adjustment. I walked the site, measured distances, took notes. It wasn't minor. It changed everything: drainage, emergency access, utilities. I'll speak to Gloria, I said at last. But I'll need everything: original plans, modifications, permit applications, approvals. Everything. They handed it all over immediately, desperate for a solution. That afternoon, I called Gloria from my home office. You've been busy, she said. They asked me to step in at Riverside, I told her. I figured. I said I'd talk to you. She laughed. And are you going to ask me to ignore their creative adjustments? No, I said quietly. I'm going to help you understand exactly what they changed, when they changed it, and which other sites might be affected. Riverside wasn't the trap. It was the trigger. There were likely dozens more. We met at a quiet coffee shop, far from downtown, and Driftline's office. I brought my documentation. She brought hers. After I read your notes, she said, stirring her drink, I started pulling every Driftline permit I could find from the last 5 years. Compared them to inspections. The pattern's clear. She slid a folder across the table. Photos from 8 construction sites, each with quiet violations, extra square footage, altered structural features, unauthorized materials. They've been building past approval limits, she said, small enough to slip past a distracted inspector, big enough to compromise safety. I wasn't shocked, but the evidence still landed hard. This wasn't carelessness. It was orchestrated fraud. The worst part, Gloria said softly, is Thomas Dray. He's leaned on us for years, calling council members, pushing back when we enforce code. 2 of my inspectors were reassigned after flagging violations. That was new. The rot went deeper than Driftline. It reached City Hall. So why now? I asked. You've known for a while. She looked exhausted. Because your files make it a pattern, not just one inspector's word against a company. A system. She paused. And because I'm retiring in 3 months, I've got nothing to lose, but I need someone who understands the technical side, who can explain violations to non-experts. I sat back, letting it sink in. Driftline hadn't just fired me. They'd removed the one person who could testify against them with clarity and credibility. There's more, I said, opening my folder. After they let me go, I reviewed my notes from the last 8 years. Sure, every project has issues, but with Driftline, there's a method. I showed her the breakdown. How they adjusted plans post-approval to gain sellable space. How they swapped out materials for cheaper equivalents. How they jumped the gun on construction, betting permits would come through. How high does this go? Gloria asked. Thomas runs it. Project managers execute his plan. Jordan's job is to streamline, meaning fewer guardrails. And now they want your help to keep it going, she said. I nodded. They think I'm loyal or desperate. Gloria drained her cup. I could issue a stop work order just for Riverside. But if we're going after the full picture, we do it all at once. Every site, I said. Full inspections, permits, materials, compliance. That would shut Driftline down for weeks, maybe months. And those are buildings where people will live, Gloria, work, raise families. I've spent my career making sure those buildings are safe. I'm not stopping just because they let me go. She studied me, then nodded. Okay, Howard, let's do it right. I need everything. Organized by project, names, dates, violations. I left the calf not vindicated, but resolved. This wasn't revenge. This was my job. Still was, just from the outside. The next morning, as promised, I returned to the Riverside site. Jordan was waiting, pacing. Well, he asked. Did you talk to Inspector Daniels? He asked right away. So, you did it? I did, I replied evenly. We went over the situation thoroughly. Hope flickered across his face. Can we keep working while the updated plans go through? I carefully explained the technical implications. The setback alters the drainage design and creates conflicts with utilities, I said deliberately. Jordan's brows knit together. That's not answering my question, Howard. She's following the correct procedures, I replied. The revisions are significant enough to require full review. You'll have to halt work in the affected zones until approval is granted. His expression darkened. That's not why we brought you on. You brought me on for my knowledge and contacts, I said calmly. I've delivered both. In my professional judgment, these changes require re-evaluation, and thanks to my relationship with Inspector Daniels, she took the time to explain the process rather than issue a stop work notice on the spot. This is ridiculous, he snapped. Thomas said you'd smooth this over. I met his gaze. I've done exactly what I was hired to do, advice on permitting. My recommendation is to return to the approved plans or prepare for serious delays. Jordan turned and stormed off, no doubt to call Thomas. I used the opening to speak with Luis, the site foreman, someone I'd worked with for over 15 years. You're building outside the scope of the permits, I said under my breath. Luis shifted uncomfortably. Came from higher up. They said the new permits were on the way. They're not, I replied, and inspectors will be here soon. If I were you, I'd make sure everything being built matches the approved drawings exactly. No additions, no assumptions. Luis understood. He'd been doing this long enough to see what was coming. That afternoon, Thomas called. His voice was tight, barely concealing his anger. Jordan says you're refusing to help with the Riverside situation. I've done what was outlined in the contract, I said evenly. I advised on the permit requirements. Don't give me that, Howard. You know what we needed. You needed someone willing to ignore building codes. That's never been part of my role at Driftline, and it certainly isn't now. A long silence followed. Finally, he spoke. I've always respected you, Howard. That's why your severance was generous. But if you're actively working against us, we may have to reconsider that arrangement. The threat was unmistakable. Play along or lose the severance. Do what you need to do, Thomas, I said. I will too. I hung up and immediately called Gloria. It's happening. Thomas just threatened to cancel my severance. We're ready, she said. Inspection teams are forming. Riverside is first. Then we'll move site to site this week. They'll scramble once they realize what's coming. That's why we act fast. And Howard, the city attorney wants to meet. Your records are key to any enforcement action. The next morning, I sat in my truck across from the Riverside site as Gloria arrived with 3 inspectors and a city attorney. From my vantage point, I saw Jordan's anxious expression, the frantic calls, the hurried meetings with supervisors. By noon, work had completely stopped. Crews gathered in clusters, unsure of what to do, while inspectors documented every code violation. My phone buzzed. A text from Luis. What the hell did you do? I didn't reply. This wasn't personal. It was about doing the job the right way, whether I was on the payroll or not. A month later, I took a seat in the back row of the city council chamber as Gloria presented her findings. The room was filled, contractors, developers, Driftline employees, reporters. Thomas and Jordan sat front row, flanked by attorneys. Gloria's report was exact and unrelenting. Slide after slide revealed violations at 12 Driftline projects, substandard materials affecting safety, buildings expanded beyond lot limits, foundations poured without permits. These aren't isolated errors, she said. They represent a coordinated effort to ignore regulations supported by documentation from former operations manager Howard Ames spanning 8 years. Thomas turned in his chair, scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on me. He didn't look angry. He looked defeated. The city attorney stepped up. In light of this evidence, all active driftline sites are under emergency stop work orders. Further, all projects completed in the last decade will undergo full inspection at the company's cost. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't a minor citation. This could break the company. And the attorney continued once the room quieted. We referred the matter to the district attorney for possible criminal charges related to permit falsification. Jordan went pale. He had signed many of those documents after taking over day-to-day operations. I didn't stay for the aftermath. No need to watch Thomas address the press or see Jordan whispering with lawyers. As I walked to my truck, my phone rang. "Howard," came the voice of Peter Hammond, CEO of Ashenbrook Supply, a competitor. "Heard what happened. We should talk. I need someone who does things by the book." 6 months later, I stood on the 19th floor of a new office tower in downtown Columbus, watching steel beams slot perfectly into place. The wind bit at my coat, but I hardly noticed. "The city approved the new drainage plan," said Megan, my assistant at Ashenbrook Construction. "Said it was the most detailed report she's seen." "Excellent," I said. "Let's schedule the concrete pour for next week, weather permitting, and get environmental monitors in place before it starts." My phone buzzed. A news alert. Driftline CEO Thomas Dray resigns amid ongoing investigation. I didn't click through. I already knew. Driftline had managed to resume some projects, but the damage was done. The reputation was ruined. Jordan had resigned quietly months earlier and vanished to California. My office at Ashenbrook was smaller than what I had at Driftline, but I didn't mind. My title, Director of Compliance and Quality Control, meant I could shut down any project not up to code. Peter had made his expectations clear. No shortcuts, no exceptions. As Megan and I rode the site elevator to ground level, she asked, "Do you ever regret what happened with Driftline? You were there so long." I thought about it as we stepped out onto firm ground. Around us, the job site buzzed with order and precision. Every piece in place. Every rule followed. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret doing the job right. Never have. Never will." I looked up at the building rising above us, solid, straight, and built to endure. Just as it should be.